shedding blood.
Yeah, it's who dies for the faith. Anytime you go to Mass and you see the priests in the red vestments, they're actually celebrating Mass. It's a feast day of a martyr. But Ireland had none, not one. That fucking Bowsy in Wales, Gerardus Cambrensis, when he wrote his text on the Irish, oh man, basically he was to laugh at the Irish because we know red markers, and we've racked them up since the Reformation. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them, probably millions. We have them up the wazoo. So I suppose the point is you better watch what you pray for, because we had zero, really, from about 5th century right down to the 15th century. Alright, so, but Patrick comes, and there are no red markers. Now here's what happens in Ireland as well, is that everybody thinks in the coming of Christianity that you go in and wipe out the old religion. No. The thing is, you take the religion, because the religion of those before Christianity, if you read any of the writings, how many here are familiar with Bede of England? He wrote the history of the church in England. Yeah. Well, the Catholic Church approach to it all is the same in Mexico, it's the same in France, in Canada. Why, it's not about destroying, it's about assimilating. Does that make any sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you know what happened with the Cajuns. Cajuns had to marry with the Indians. So when the English went to Cajuns, to kick out the Indians, they refused because they're all cousins. And so the English kicked the Cajuns out and get rid of the Indians themselves. It's a great book by Jeffrey Pennington. But anyway, the hell are they talking about? Oh yeah.
The assimilation of red Christianity.
Yeah. So we have nothing. Yeah. So what happens is now here's what they do. Okay. So the approach is read the letter of Pope Gregory to St. Augustine of Canterbury and explains it. You don't destroy the old religion. What the old religion speaks to is a civilization that can become and know the true God. Now you're bringing the true God. So take their customs, take their festivals, take their things, and just reorient them, make them Catholic. So if you go to Ireland, okay, you see all these old places with all these old traditions and so forth that are basically borrowed in from the pre-Christian period and have become part of the Christian religion. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we got to places we want to tour where you can go and you see the wedding, there's all these sacramentals, holy cars. Typically, the site is going to be at a well, which is basically a source of water and life, and then there's going to be a fruit-bearing tree. Normally it's going to be Cuerden, which is a mountain ash, or it's going to be hazel, something that bears fruit, then that basically symbolizes the connection between heaven and earth. All that making sense? And then this is where the Christians set up their monasteries, right by the old Druidic site, because here was where the Druids used to have their celebrations. These are no longer Druids, these are quasi-Christians themselves. Okay? So it's not like there's a whole invasion of missionaries. That's not what happened. You have basically a quasi-Christian society that now has St. Patrick and those who he wins over to his side going around and Christianizing. Is all that making sense? That's what happens. You can see that all over Ireland. But out of all of this comes an incredible body of literature written in the Irish language. The old epic stories. It is the largest, in fact this is actually it was this literature inspired Tolkien to write Lord of the Rings. He was trying to find something for England that would match that of Ireland, you know. That's a whole other story. But what we have is this literature, and if you ever get a chance to do a course in this literature, there's 3 cycles of it. There's actually 4. The 4th one is not really related to the monasteries. But what it does, it basically deals with the cycle of the kings, that deals with the fall of man. Because basically, if you look at time, in the church's view, you have broken up into 4 epochs. Okay, you have the fall. Then you have the wanderings, the fall, salvation, and then creation, fall, salvation, and then the 4 last things, judgment. Okay? But this deals with the fall and salvation. And the stories in the fall are hilarious. They all deal with women.
The ones I was thinking of.
So if we ever, that's what I talk about it. that much, you know. So you have the 4 cycles in the literature. I've got another paper here. I'm just going to talk about it. So the first one is the cycle of the kings, or the historical cycle. And the key reference point to this is the Garden of Eden. So there's a huge amount of genealogy that traces the Irish all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Then you have the mythological cycle. And the mythological cycle really is the actual it's based on the etymology of oh, I looked very this morning. Of Seville. What's the name of the Bishop of Seville? He's going to come to me. So what it is, it has all the lore relating to Celtic society, and then it has the central text, and it's called the Law of the Walla, which is the Book of Invasions. And this is basically the story of the origin of the Irish. It's a great story. It tells where they come, right? It takes them all the way through the known world, historical world. They're actually in Greece fighting with the Athenians against the blooming, well, Philistines. What the Philistines were doing there, what they were. They make their way down to Egypt. They meet up with the Pharaoh. They intermarry with the Pharaoh's family, you know? Yeah, and then after that, they help the Jews to get out of Egypt. They do, and then Moses, and this is the great part, I love this, so Moses promises them a share in the promised land. Well, what does that mean? Who received the promise of the promised land?
Abraham.
Yeah, and he was part of the chosen people of God. But hang on now a second, if we're going to include the Irish in that promise, we're going to include them with the chosen people, right? Which makes them a chosen people. I mean, that's the way I read it anyway. But Noah decides, no, they got another land set aside for them. It's a land without sin. What does a land without sin mean? Who sins? The whole bloody place sins. We got it all. You should see my record. Then it has, what doesn't it have?
People.
Exactly. Okay, so it doesn't have people, and this is Ireland. So it comes along then, you're actually there for a Tower of Babel. If you want to know where the Irish word, or the Irish language comes from, the Tower of Babel, okay, a man's pride to avoid a flood, decided to build this great tower, comes tumbling down, and God, to stop him from doing it again, basically gives everybody a different language. The chief druid, or philosopher, teacher of the Celts is a guy called Phineas Fastig, so he decides he'll send out his students, get the finest pieces of each language, put them all together, and what do we end up with? Gaelic. It contains the finest of all the languages of the world. Making sense? And he was right. So the mythological cycle in our war traces that. It's based on the wanderings of the Jews, the starting books of the Bible. Okay, and they come to Ireland. Then, of course, after the Old Testament, you're going to get the Gospels, and the Gospels are about the coming of Christ and the resurrection. Are we going to get that? Oh yeah, we are. We're going to get the Ulster cycle. Who is the main character in the Ulster cycle? It's a guy called Cuchulainn. Who's his nemesis? It's a woman called Maeve. When a woman rules, what do we have?
Chaos.
I'm not kidding you. Read the time book. It basically is that when a woman rules, you have complete and total chaos. Okay? So, in the midst of all of this, there comes into Ulster society, and the stories here are great because they're dealing with the whole warrior culture in Ireland. And the warrior culture is built on pride, Okay? So there's all kinds of assaults on pride, and also all kinds of assaults on men's behaviour, you know, or lack of fortitude of the virtues, character, you know. I mean, Cuchulainn himself, before he changed his track, is one of those people that's susceptible to all these flaws and failings. As a matter of fact, he's far greater than anybody else's. You know? But there's some great stories, great poems. But Cuchulainn, he comes into the world. Well, how was he conceived? There's three parts to his conception. The first part is a god and goddess. The second part is a god and a woman. And the third part is man and woman. What's happening here? What do we start with?
God.
Divinity.
What do we end up with?
Cohabitation.
No, people on the earth.
Living in sin is a terrible,
Okay.
like, what it would use for that. So we went from divinity and a man and woman, human. So what's happening? God is becoming
Human.
human. Okay, right. So this is what he is. He's a prefigurement of Christ. So he has all these amazing gifts and talents. He grows to become a warrior. He can't take any arms except those of a king. He cannot have any chariot except those of a king. You know? He cannot have anything except those of a king, which means he's...
The king.
Does he have a rule here on earth?
I don't think he does.
He has all kinds of problems and issues, but then he is dunked in water 3 times. What's happened to him?
Baptized.
He becomes baptized. Then his people are invaded, and he defends them. Okay? And he ends up dead, standing up, with a spear to his side. He dies upright with it. Who are we talking about?
Christ.
There you go. It's a blooming great story. In the middle of it all,
It is.
he fights his best friend. This was his foster brother. They had sworn a pact. I can't think of the right word. It comes from the word fer, which means man, and dia, which is
God.
God, the man God. He fights the man God at the battle of the Ford. It goes on over 3 days. What does the man God represent?
Jesus.
He's not.
Cuchulainn's
Cuchulainn is the Christ figure. He's not going to rule in there. What did the Jews want? Did they want Christ, or what kind of a king did they want?
They wanted a physical king.
They wanted a warrior king, a man God. Okay? So this is where he's defeated. It's the defeat of the New Covenant over the Old Covenant. Does that make any sense? In the course of it all as well, one of the great events in the whole Gospels, as you know, is what they used to say at home was the duel in the desert. What was the duel in the desert?
Between
Christ and Satan. That's when the battle between the mystical body of Christ and the mystical body of Satan opens up again. Okay? And this takes place as well because Cuchulainn is assaulted by the Moraine. Who is the Moraine? She is the great queen. So she represents the great queen of the old religion. She attacks him 3 times. He defeats her 3 times, and it is the Moraine that warns him. She becomes subordinate to him, and it's the Moraine who was on his shoulder when he died. All kings have become subordinate to him. Does that make sense? It's a fucking great story.
It is.
You should read it. All right.
I've read the
now that
Master
we've gone
Cycle.
through all of that,
Just
we
can't
want to
pronounce
start
it.
learning some language because at 11 beds we're going to have to take a break for a glass of water. Who wants a glass of water? That little girl has a lot of sense. As a matter of fact, the little girl has more sense than the others inside this class. Okay, we'll go on. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, I'm going to go to Miss Pennsylvania over here.
Okay, can you explain where the word Hibernia comes from?
No.
No? Okay.
It's from Latin,
Okay.
and people have talked about it being connected with Iberia in Spain,
Right,
derived from that, you know.
okay.
Other people talk about it, the nature of climate of the island.
Okay.
I could find out for you. I probably did know one time, but that was 30 years. You should have heard me 30 years ago.
Ulster was the third cycle, what was the fourth?
The Fenians,
Okay.
the Fenian cycle, which is an awesome cycle altogether. There's
I've
a
read
lot
that
of
one.
magic in it. And it has been redacted. Because the third cycle, you see, literature in Ireland has always been closely aligned with politics. So Carolyn asked me there about the Fenian cycle. This all deals with Finn McCool. How many have heard of Finn McCool? All right. But what happens with the Fenian cycle is, say, who are the Fenians? How many have heard of Fenians in America? How many here are Irish American?
We're the Fenians.
You are the blooming Fenians. So here's the deal. I got to tell you about the Fenians in America. They were set up in 1858 by Irish immigrants. They'd all been driven out of town with a famine, and they were pissed. And what they wanted to do was raise an army and go back to Ireland and drive the British out of Ireland. Okay? So they came together as a group. This group was actually a phenomenal group of people because they came together, the true these Irish Americans, they went into the Civil War on both sides to learn how to fight. They were on the Confederate side, they were on the Northern side. In 1863, the Fenians had a convention in Chicago. Now this is difficult for people to believe. Communications came from the South about the, what you call it, the convention, that they wanted passage to attend the convention. And the Northern Army, because there were so many Irish and so many Fenians at positions of extreme importance in the army, granted a permission for the Fenian officers on the Confederate side to pass through the Northern lines, attend the convention in Chicago, and then go back again. That to tell you, when you had during the Civil War in these different regiments, you had the normal drills for the regiments, you had separate Fenian drills, there was hundreds of thousands of them. Okay? When Thomas Francis Meagher came out here as governor, the place was run by what were known as the vigilantes, and anybody who stood in their way, they would wipe out. There were actually two mobs. The vigilantes were one, and the gang run by Jake Plummer, not Jake Plummer, but Henry Plummer, the sheriff, was the other one, you know. But they would attack miners. The only miners they never attacked were Irish miners. Why didn't they attack Irish miners? Well, in Montana at the time, you had somewhere between 500 and 700 Fenians. Okay, these were all ex-Civil War, and they were tough, hard, and as one person described them, nasty people. Now, the person who described that was actually the editor of the Montana Post, who wrote about them 3 times. As a kind of a warning. When Thomas Francis Meagher came out here and opened the first legislature and did what he did, he should have been dead. But they wouldn't go near him, and the reason they wouldn't go near him was because of the Fenians. The Fenians were here planning an invasion of Canada. They invaded Canada 3 times. The Ottawa sent out its finest regiment to deal them. The Fenians had them beaten off the field in Ridgeway in 45 minutes. Practically almost wiped them out. They came here, and when they were here, they protected Meagher. And people that argue when Meagher was killed, he was deliberately murdered, that pilots knew that river so well. It wasn't the first time they were on the river. This was not uncharted water, but that there were groups waiting to pick up the body in places where it might be swept ashore, to hide the body. Why would you hide the body?
So there's no evidence of the death?
Huh?
Covered up?
What do you have in here? What do you got to do with a dead body? You got to bury it. That's a funeral. What happens if you have an Irish funeral?
Everybody show up.
You get
Well,
drunk.
no, you're not going to have 700 Fenians. You're going to have about 20,000 of them. So what are they going to do? They're going to drink beer, and then when they're done drinking beer, they're going to drop a list of who's responsible, and there's going to be mayhem. And if you were thinking about having protection, well, you had the cavalry. The problem with the cavalry is that they were mostly Irish and Fenian. So the cavalry, who are Fenians, are not going to attack Fenians.
So you have maintained...
So here, these guys, well, they said they ain't done yet. They started a rebellion back in Ireland in 1867. That failed. Two of their leaders, decorated Civil War veterans, were arrested and going to trial to be hanged. So they broke them out of jail, got them back to America. The Manchester Martyrs, 3 others were found and hanged for it. Then they had another 6 or 8 of them down in Fremantle, so they hijacked a whaling boat, went down there and basically broke them out of the jail in Australia and got them back to the States. But the interesting thing about it was not these separate incidents. What happens now is that they are basically have announced to the British government that Irish nationalism has gone international, and by 1882, because of them, the British government is now referring to the Irish problem as the Irish-American problem, and they could not control the Irish-Americans. They tried to get the government to do it over here, but they wouldn't touch it, you know, because of the positions. I mean, this is true. So these boys invade Canada. The Brits are absolutely going ballistic. Ulysses S. Grant sent up men to arrest them. They arrest them, don't even arrest them, they bring them back across the border, take the guns off them, give them train tickets to get home, and then have the guns delivered back to them afterwards. They should have been in jail.
Yeah, except that the British supported the South during the war, so the government in D.C. thought it was kind of nice payback to have the Irish...
You had that, but then you had Captain O'Neill and Ulysses S. Grant were like that. Captain O'Neill.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so this is what happened, and then they're here, and then they formed Handyman, and Handyman, as you probably don't know, but you should know, is the Irish-American organisation that organised... Okay, this is going off on a tangent. There's no Irish independence without Irish-America. Charles Stewart Parnell comes out here, he's trying to put together a home rule movement, a political movement to win home rule at least. He is broke. He comes out, he meets John Devoy, who was the great organisational genius of the time. And Devoy sets up 100 lectures for him in 2 months, has him address the Joint Council of Congress and sends him home with $300,000 to set up the organisation. Then enters what's called a new departure, where Devoy is basically directing everything that's going on in Ireland now. He's providing all the resources, he's providing the support as well of the Irish-American growing political influence. Also those in Congress, okay? So they're controlling home rule. And look, in Ireland it's going very, very well. There's all kinds of pressure being brought to bear on the British. The British changed their policy in Ireland. Instead of going in there and wiping everything out and inflicting mayhem, they bring in a policy called killing home rule with kindness. So basically, so they give Ireland everything, so they stop looking for home rule or freedom. But that only makes them worse. Okay? So eventually, the British concede home rule in 1912. And it's supposed to come in 1914, the First World War breaks out. The head of the Home Rule Party goes into the English Parliament and says that we are going to go and fight with England in Europe in the First World War. The Irish Americans go berserk because they're fighting with the British Empire, you know? So what they do is they pull the rug out from the Home Rule movement. Devoy goes and gets Tom Clark, who's a dairy farmer in New York, and basically tells him, knock that nonsense off. Your days of milking cows are over. Get over to Ireland and organise a rebellion, which is what he does. And that's when 1916. And you can get 1916 is pretty fascinating because they tell you what they're doing. You know, they actually give you the date of when it's going to happen. You know? So in 1915, in August of 1915, an Irish-American called O'Donovan Rossa, I love this guy. The governor of Pentonville prison said he was the toughest man he ever came across in his life, and he actually told the British government, you ain't going to break this fella. They had him in solitary confinement, hands tied behind the back, all kinds of things. We couldn't break him. So eventually what they did is that, and which they did frequently, is that they basically say we're going to turn him loose as long as he goes to America. And typically what happens is if someone in America didn't bump him off. Now his life, he was shot alright, but he survived. But anyway, he dies in 1915 and the body is sent home to Ireland to be buried. Okay? So his funeral is taking place in 1915, and in 1915 the address that's delivered at the graveside by Padraig Pearse actually tells you what's happening. So he comes along in the course of that address. He basically says the Home Rule thing is over. He says we're here to introduce the Fenian program, which is the Irish American program. And what do we want? Ireland, not merely free, but Gaelic as well. Not merely free, but Gaelic as well. Is that making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Then he goes on, and he tells them that, if I wish I had a speech here, has anyone got one of those fancy phones?
Hold on, I'll get it.
Yeah, and caught up
The speech of Don Barrasso, right?
yeah, of Padraig Pearse, but he goes on, and then he says, I gotta get some water, I'm talking too much.
The fools, the fools, the fools.
Yeah, that's the speech, but go to the paragraph before that, before it culminates in that.
Hold on, I'm getting there.
Gosh darn it.
Ireland free and Gaelic, they're not really free, but Gaelic and free.
Not merely free, but Gaelic as well, not merely Gaelic, but free as well. Isn't that how we put it?
Padraig Pearse, O'Donovan and Rossa.
Oration at the graveside of O'Donovan Rossa.
So this is all part of the Fenian cycle, the fourth.
But these are the guys that inspired him. I go back to the Fenian cycle then.
Do you want me to just play it?
Can you give me a glass? Can I see that? I have no glasses.
Absolutely.
Can I borrow your glasses as well?
Absolutely. Well, these are distance. They're bifocals. Here we go. Okay, here we go.
That's no good to me. I wear a pair of reading glasses.
There you go. Okay. We got Patrick.
Yeah, we just want to, what you call it, the text though. They don't want to do the whole rigmarole.
Okay, let me just see, okay, the oration. Here
That's
we go.
it.
You want the proclamation?
No, the oration. Just here, isn't it? There it is, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Okay, so
Name wrong.
here,
Read that?
I can, yeah.
Okay. I can read it if you'd like me to.
So he basically says here at the beginning, he talks about himself, he's younger, and he says it's perhaps that I may be taken, let me go up here to the top. May be taken, as speaking on behalf of a new generation that has been rebaptized in the Fenian faith, and that has accepted the responsibility of carrying out the Fenian program. So this is the Irish American program he's talking about. So we're done with home rule. I propose to you then that here, by the grave of this unrepentant Fenian, we renew our baptismal vows, that here by the grave of this unconquered and unconquerable man, we ask of God, each one for himself, such unshakable purpose, such high gallant courage, such unbreakable strength of soul, as belonged to O'Donovan Rossa. So now he's telling you that home rule is over. The Fenians are the gunmen. Okay? These are guys that believe in the physical force. They don't want to be talking, they don't want to be discussing things. Okay, there's stuff to get done here. These fellas are in the way, shoot them, and let's get it done. They had been kind of pushed aside, but the boy had brought both groups together, but he'd given prominence as he believed in Stuart Parnell in the politicians. Okay, so, but now the Redmen and the Home Rule movement had betrayed them, they're gone, the government are back in business. Now here's what he comes around and concludes it, and he says, this is a place of peace, sacred to the dead, where men should speak without charity and without restraint. For I hold the Christian thing, as O'Donovan Rossa held it, to hate evil, to hate untruth, to hate oppression, and hating them to strive to overthrow them. Our foes are strong and wise and weary, but strong and wise and weary as they are, they cannot undo the miracles of God, who ripens in the hearts of young men the seed sown by the young men of a former generation. And the seeds sown by the young men of 65 and 67 are coming to their miraculous ripening today. Rulers and defenders of realms had need be wary if they would guard against such processes. Life springs from death, and from the graves of patriot men and women spring living nations. The defenders of the realm have worked well in secret and in the open. They think that they have pacified Ireland. They think that they have purchased half of us and intimidated the other half. They think that they have foreseen everything, think that they have provided against everything. But the fools, the fools, the fools. They have left us our Fenian dead. And when Ireland pours these graves, Ireland free shall never be at peace. Now, here's what he's talking about. Life springs from dead, and from the graves of dead patriot men and women spring living nations. So we're talking about death and resurrection. What time of the year do we commemorate death and resurrection? There you go.
Easter, right.
They are talking about, exactly. They're telling it when they're doing it. Okie dokie. But anyway, this is the group that inspires. They go back to the Fenian cycle, okay? And what we're talking about here, the great leader of this thing is a guy called Phil McCool. You might have heard of him. These guys have given their, there's some, but never, I'm not going to go into it, now we need the text. But who are they? Everyone thinks Fianna comes from the Irish word Fianna, which are dear, absolute nonsense. It comes from the Irish word Fian, which is wild. What am I talking about? While you go back to Celtic society, there's a period in your life of a young man between 16 and 21 where he has no defined legal status. He cannot enter into a contract, okay? He cannot contract a marriage, he can't contract anything. So what does he do? Well, someone will go, if their parents or fathers are in trades or whatever, they go down that road. A lot of them go for military training. And they actually leave and go for military training. How many here know how the Hells Angels were formed?
Those angels.
Yeah? Where did they come from?
That's,
They were vets that couldn't return to second society. So they liked the company, the men. This is what happened. The same thing happens here. Young men are sent to military training. They receive their military training. They're supposed to go home, some of them don't. They can't return to it. They like the military life. So what do? They hire themselves out then, two different chieftains, yeah, they're mercenaries, or they go and plunder themselves. Actually, they got a name as well that has come down into the surnames of Ireland. It's made up of Muir and Coo, because they frequently travelled by sea. Muir is sea, and Coo is hound or warrior. Muir Coo. O Muir Coo. O Morachoo. That's the Irish name, O Morachoo. And in Irish, that name, Morachoo, or Morcha, as they would say, is also the Irish word for calamity. If I want to say I had a terrible day, or we had a calamity, I would say the Vul Morachalum, or the Vul Morachame. I met with Morachoo, or Morachoo hit me, or I saw Morachoo. What name in English comes from Morachoo? It's very, very common. A very common Irish name. Go on, say it.
Murder?
What Irish name?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Murphy is right. Exactly. Murphy. And you know Murphy's Law? Something's going to go wrong, that all goes back to that.
Murphy was an optimist.
Murphy's Law. But anyway, so these were wild, and what they did is that this history was rewritten by the O'Briens, and they became the great militia and defenders of Ireland. When the King of Ireland wouldn't defend Ireland, the Fenians did. When the local kings wouldn't defend their provinces, the Fenians did. So he was building a kind of sense of national consciousness. He was undermining the authority of the kings, because he himself, when he took over Ireland, didn't proclaim himself a king. He called himself an emperor. Why? If you recall earlier, I was talking about the chieftain and all the restrictions of what he could do. He couldn't name that land. So the status of the king was well defined. It was basically controlled by all kinds of laws and rules
the emperor
governing your rights. Emperor, no legal standing. You could make it up as you go along.
Same thing Caesar did when he claimed.
Exactly. You know. All right. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. No. Yeah.
All the way back to the beginning. So we explained kind of how they came over Ireland, brought their women, but we Is it known why it is Q and not P like the rest of the
Because
Isles?
Q Celtic, they believe, was that Celtic broke into two languages, P and Q.
Mhm.
Q Celtic was the dialect spoken in the south by the southern Celts, P Celtic in the north.
Okay, so they think they came in from...
They came in, they were driven out. So as the Roman Empire was advancing, they are being pushed out,
Mhm.
and they came north, and lots of them, of course, would have ended up in France and become P Celtic speakers. Then others landed in basically what was a depopulated Ireland,
Okay.
and that's one of the arguments. You know, it made the most one that seems to be that makes most sense.
Mhm. Okay. Danke.
So, any other questions? How many want to learn some Irish?
I don't have the ability.
Awesome. Okay, let's have a look at what we have here.
He didn't say it could.
All right. Now, when we teach Irish up here at the University of Montana, we're teaching you to speak the language. By the way, these courses are all going to be online. Okay? We're not too interested in grammar and grammar rules. I'm not saying we're not uninterested or not interested in I'm not saying that we don't have any interest in it. We do, but we kind of do it to be a mommy top big. What way we teach the Irish is what's called a Mod Europe, and it was designed in Ireland between 1898 and 1906. It's always been a very effective way of teaching the language. For some reason in Ireland in the late 60s, early 70s, they figured technology and more progressive language methodologies were better. The results have been atrocious, but we're not going to say, don't go back to the Mod Europe. The funny thing about it is in America, that's what they use. If you go to Notre Dame, they don't use any of these teaching methodologies. In actual fact, when they have kids come out from Ireland that are taught, they'll actually take them and say, you know that stuff you learned about teaching the language in Ireland, forget that. Can't. This is what you're going to do. Boom, boom, boom. I don't care what course you have or what. They're using it. They're using this. Yes?
Can you explain why the language was so important for independence, that it's such an integral part, and even now the language is so integral that you have to pass it to get out of high school?
You do, okay. It all got to do with identity.
Mm-hmm. Language is who you are.
America.
America.
Okay, so in America, we have this idea of a pluribus unum.
From the mini one.
Exactly. You see, but Europe has its roots in Christendom. One faith, religion. And from that, many. A unum pluribus. Okay? So you had French and German. There you go. It's over. Done. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
It's still on the children to keep it going now.
But there's no real commitment to it in Ireland. You know? As such, I mean, you have all this money going into it, but if you go to the Department of Education now, of all the employees, where one time you might have had 80% of them were Irish speakers, you might have 5%. And most other government departments, no. You know? So, in many cases, it's a kind of a tokenism. You know? But that is probably going to change. You know? Because Ireland's going through a huge identity crisis at the moment.
With immigration, with the immigrants?
Well, the immigrants is a separate thing, but you know, the whole question of who are we or what are we? We're in this whole European, but thought to be Europe, but European doesn't give you any identity. It's like saying I'm white as an identity. What the hell does that mean? It means that I'm not black, I'm not yellow, I'm not pink.
And even the church is having difficulty as well?
Well, the church is ruined, you know? Because no one, there's been a huge thought in the religion, and then the church itself, no one's defending it. You know, so the church is in a huge state. And what happens then is it's starting to fragment into different political groups. So at one time you had a more unified culture, now you have these different kind of competing groups within the society, and different agendas being promoted. No unity. Anyway, with the language, I believe myself over the next number of years, because I'm starting to see more and more people take an active interest in preserving. I mean, ordinary people, politicians I really have no time for, but when you have ordinary people going out there and striving to promote the language, send their kids to learn the language, you know, even try to use it at home themselves. You know, well, that points to things starting to change. But the issue with the language now is that even when we have speakers that come out from Ireland that are very fluent, like my grandfather wouldn't understand a lot of them. Because my grandfather, as my mother used to say, "You'd have been going to get into other school, it's been supposed to be a gay task fast." He had no Irish going to school, he had even less coming back out of it. However, that worked. But the thing is that they don't know the language, the idioms of the language. So what they do is they take things from English, they translate them into Irish. So you have to know English to understand the Irish. When my grandfather speaks English, you have to know Irish to understand his English. Is that making sense? So what has to happen is not just you have fluent speakers, we have to go back to a whole other curriculum where you focus on the tradition, the literature of the language, which provides you access to all these idioms and these expressions, you know, ways of saying things, and a whole worldview, a whole other experience altogether.
Oh my goodness, it changes your worldview.
Okay, any other questions before we launch into learning? How come the lights went up?
Yeah.
I thought that maybe they were motion, but, you know, you're moving around, so I
It also makes it a lot cooler.
No more questions?
Not right now.
I think they're on a sensor.
What did you bring?